Hi everyone, my name is Tara Marcus and I'm the VP of Marketing here at Hyperproof, and I'll be playing the role of moderator for today. The goal of the webinar is to kind of have a panelist format, asking some key questions around HITRUST and specifically, learning about how Artemis Health approached HITRUST and their journey. And we will kick it off. I'd now like to quickly introduce our three speakers. They'll do quick introductions, but we have Kathleen McNaughton, Craig Unger, and Ryan Patrick joining us today on calls. Kathleen, if you want to kick it off.
So I am Kathleen McNaughton. I'm the Security and Compliance Engineer for Artemis by Nomi Health.
Hi all, I'm Craig Unger. I'm the founder and CEO of Hyperproof. Spent about 30 plus years in the industry, most of it at Microsoft, working on products like Microsoft Excel and Microsoft Access.
Hey everybody, Ryan Patrick. Don't want everybody to be alarmed. I know when you registered, you probably saw Jeremy Hubel's handsome face. He unfortunately was not able to attend, so I am excited to jump in here. I've been with HITRUST just over 2.5 years. My background is primarily in healthcare cybersecurity and working for the Department of Defense. Thanks.
All right, we'll kick things off. So first question kind of for the panelists, what is your perspective on the biggest challenges facing businesses today? Ryan, if you wanted to kick this off from the HITRUST perspective, and then Kathleen, if you wanted to follow up, that would be great.
Sure. So I think, keeping it focused on the security, privacy, risk management space, I think organizations are challenged to be innovative in ways because of the risks of partnering with other organizations in order to be innovative. What we've seen is attack after attack after attack in really all industries where it had to do with, a lack of due diligence in some cases, a lack of control maturity in other cases. Maybe the environment was so dynamic that controls just weren't as effective as they were before. And what that's now doing is it's kind of slowing down the speed of business, and it can inadvertently slow down, like I said, the innovation that can happen between organizations solving problems, whether those be business problems, whether they be, problems in healthcare or problems in financial services. Having to stop, take a knee, drink some water, and really understand, what am I getting with this new business partner? How are they going to protect my data? How am I going to protect their data? It takes time to get through that process. And I really think that's, at least from a HITRUST perspective, what we're seeing most organizations come to us and ask those types of questions.
And I think from my side of the story is that when I started in several years back, it was really kind of, you were looking to meet one framework. And some of the most commons that I had seen at that time was like NIST and ISO. Well, now it's looking more at everybody is looking at their different frameworks that they see as important. And so you're needing to attest to many different frameworks to try and cover everybody. And then trying to keep all of that straight can be very difficult. So that's kind of where HITRUST comes in, is it does kind of bring everything together and allow you to add what you're really needing for your business perspective. And then it also, helps with a lot of the new state-specific requirements to be able to tie them all together, but also give you the resources to say, this one control meets all of these requirements in the different frameworks, so you can know exactly what's going where and keep it all together.
I would also add, related to Ryan and Kathleen's comments, this challenge that we have, I really agree with what Ryan said around innovation and new tech. It's been there before, right? It's been digital transformation, business process re-engineering. We had Bitcoin. Now, of course, we've got challenges around, AI, or of course, moving to the cloud generally before that. And then AI, they're all technology challenges, which I think was what Ryan was getting at. and they add a lot of responsibility to the folks who are actually trying to work safely in the organization and protect the organization. And when it comes down to challenging the space we're talking about, it really is about how do you protect those folks who are doing the work in the organization. And I think some of Kathleen's comments around, needing different frameworks and different views of controls processes in order to really keep the entire organization safe is a real challenge. And it's not possible for most organizations to hire enough people to say, hey, I'm just going to hire a new person on AI controls and a new person on this particular piece. And so you need a more holistic view of how to solve that problem.
Awesome. And how have you seen, and you touched on this a little bit, but how have you seen the risk and compliance demands evolve for businesses of today? I mean, obviously we've got the framework side as well, but it seems like even regulations and even the government, the way they're getting involved has changed. How have the three of you kind of seen those demands change?
I'll kick this one off to just one higher level comment, and I know that Ryan will have a perspective on the work he does on HITRUST, but generally, the enforcement agencies are getting more active, and that's really happening in two ways. One is they're taking more enforcement action. So you can see organizations like the SEC in the United States. Years ago, they really weren't issuing fines and levying fines, and they've successively made increasing demands on public organizations, which I'm sure we'll probably end up touching on later in this discussion. But they're just enforcing more, and they tend to be enforcing for places where the overall oversight process has really failed, more so than somebody made a point-in-time mistake. That's one aspect. And then the second aspect is the same or similar regulatory bodies are issuing more regulations that you need to follow. And then that's, we kind of touched on already, which is there's just a lot of work to do, and how do you make sure that you can get all those done without having to hire an army to do it. I think those are two ways that the market has been changing.
Yeah, I would piggyback onto Craig's comments. The SEC is definitely, I don't want to say making waves as to imply that it's all negative, but they definitely have been making waves in the last 12 to 15 months with all the work they're doing, implementing new rules, new policies, if you will, enforcing organizations to attest that an incident has happened. And oh, by the way, the SEC seems to be taking it a step further and bringing either civil or criminal suits against people within these organizations post breach, which is not going to be hotly debated here on this panel. I think that's very polarizing. I've seen, at least in the conversations that I've had. But the point is well stated by Craig, that the federal government and even state governments now, going back to Kathleen's comments, they're really digging in. They're trying to solve this problem, but the challenge is, even at the state level, they just can't move fast enough. And that's really what we're seeing from a HITRUST perspective, the evolution kind of snowballing, if you will, from the relevancy of these regulations or the relevancy of the frameworks themselves is pretty dated. And, Kathleen's comments about being in a multi-regulatory environment, those controls or those requirements within that environment, say from CMS or the SEC or other regulators, is that they're probably several years old in the things that they're asking for. And the malicious actors out there have already moved on probably 2 or 3 times since those things have been written. How do you keep up with that moving target? And that's really the challenge. I do want to shamelessly plug the fact that I don't think we need more regulation. I don't think we need more frameworks. If you look at the multitude of framework standards or regulations out there, there's probably a good 85 to 90% overlap in the controls that they're all looking for. So we're not really, breaking glass here with a new framework in the types of controls that expect you to have. It's probably already covered by several others. It really is about what are you doing with that framework once you've decided to adopt it, not only from a is it prescriptive enough? Is it actually telling me what I need to do? But oh, by the way, how capable is this control within my environment? And lastly, what kind of assurance can I provide to my business partners, my stakeholders, whether those are other organizations, peer organizations, or it's my customers, or even, regulators? How can I instill a level of confidence that when I say I'm following something like HITRUST or ISO or NIST or PCI or whatever it is, I've actually interpreted it the right way? There is scalability from one assessment to the next to ensure that if I'm a consumer of those reports, they all kind of look the same, they all smell the same. So it's not, going to take an act of Congress, into Craig's point, an army of analysts to figure out and decipher these individual reports that are based on a framework that isn't prescriptive, and there isn't an assurance program built on top of that. So that's really what I'm seeing is it's kind of a multitude of things going on, but there's gross inefficiencies that are distracting organizations from being able to innovate, from being able to move at the speed of business at which business wants to move. So that's really what we're trying to tackle each and every day.
I think I would just like to add that from like a business perspective of trying to meet the controls is that no, there is a very broad statements and controls, and so it is left for interpretation. And so it is up to you and your business to decide how you want to meet that control. And so it can be a struggle of how each person interprets what is being asked and how you're going to meet it. And there is several different ways that you can meet it. So ensuring that you are doing the right thing that meets both the control and is most efficient for your business. And not only that, but continued compliance with it. And that is kind of another challenge of once you get all of these controls in place is the continued upkeep and I'm going to say education and ownership of these processes and procedures to continue to keep them moving. And it comes that each person or business company really focuses on what they feel is important. And so, competing with that of somebody feels MFA is the most important versus, some other of the controls that trying to ensure that you are meeting them all to the best level that you can, but also meet the demands of your customers.
It's a difficult challenge to balance for sure. And Ryan, you touched on this a little bit, but you can obviously speak to this a bit more. But what role does HITRUST play in that evolution of these kind of demands? Like obviously, you guys have a very particular take on how you've approached this. So if you can dig into that a little bit more.
Yeah, maybe intentionally, everything we've discussed thus far is right in line with all of the work that HITRUST is trying to do and work with really any and all industries in tackling these problems. So for those of you who are not super familiar with HITRUST, we're a framework of frameworks, if you will. We built a core framework, but we've mapped 50 plus other framework standards or regulations into our framework. And our almost cliche mantra at this point is assess once, report many. We do not believe in duplicative, redundant, inefficient mechanisms where someone like Kathleen not only has to report out against HIPAA to OCR, but she may also have a contract with the federal government and she's got to comply or demonstrate maturity against 853. And oh, by the way, she's got customers who have these security questionnaires who are asking eerily the same things and probably doing it 100 times a year. It's so inefficient, it's so redundant, it's so duplicative that's really what we're trying to solve for at HITRUST. And we've built a methodology and a program to make those assessments, the validated portion of those assessments, a bit easier on organizations, especially those who are working in either a full cloud environment, a hybrid cloud environment, where you're able to leverage the work of others and leverage the controls and the assessments that they've already done. But I think the biggest thing is that HITRUST is committed to relevancy. We update our framework at minimum twice a year. So every 6 months, we are looking at what new authoritative sources, as we call them, and when I say that, I mean new standards, regulations, and/or frameworks. And what does our assessments look like as it relates to the threats that are happening in the wild today? So not only are we updating our framework every 6 months, we've committed to ingesting threat data on a quarterly basis, bouncing that off of the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And Taryn, this might be a good spot to go to, I think it's slide 8, maybe. We are ingesting threat data. We're bouncing that off of the MITRE ATT&CK framework to understand, okay, what are the TTPs that these threat actors are using? What are the mitigations that protect against these TTPs and ultimately the threats themselves? And once we've done that analysis, we're looking at our 3 different assessment types. And if you're not familiar, there's a slide that will come up on our 3 assessment types. And we're making decisions. Are we protecting against the threats that are happening in the wild today for organizations who are pursuing HITRUST from this day forward? If we identify a glaring gap, either we don't have a control in one of our assessments that covers it whatsoever, or we need to make a tweak to those controls in order to better protect against the threats that are happening today, we will make those changes, and all assessments moving forward will include those changes to ensure the best protection possible. I don't know of another framework, certification, attestation, whatever you want to refer to, or flavor of the week type of stuff, that's doing that as frequently as we're doing it. And it's because we realize environments are dynamic. Your IT environments, your operating environments within your companies are very dynamic. They're probably changing almost on a daily basis. Well, guess what's more dynamic? The threat and malicious actors are more dynamic than the changes are happening in your environment. So we have to try to keep up with the times. And that's really what we're committed to, is making sure that our framework and by extension, the assessments in which organizations get certified against are relevant. They will protect you against threats that are being seen happen today.
And, going a little bit deeper than that, I think there's at least, definitely an assumption on my side that HITRUST is really largely related to healthcare, but I think that's not really necessarily the case. So, from your perspective, Ryan, who does HITRUST apply to, and who can get the benefits out of it from a company standpoint?
This is going to sound super easy, like I'm giving a hand wave, but it really applies to anybody and everybody, right? We were born out of healthcare. We were focused on healthcare for almost 15 years, but we've created an industry agnostic framework at this point. Our assessments are industry agnostic. You won't see anything talking about PHI, PII, the HIPAA security rule in our assessments by default. That doesn't mean we've forgotten where it came from. You can still pull in the HIPAA security rule, the privacy rule, breach notification, all that stuff into an assessment of your choice. But what we've done is we've built these assessments based on our framework to apply to any and all industries. So you will see, we don't have a slide on it here, but if you're really curious, reach out to me, or you can go on our website. We are covering not only things that have to do with the federal government, so we're mapped to FedRAMP, or mapped to StateRAMP, or mapped to 853, NIST 170, 800, 171, among others, but we've also mapped in state level security and privacy regulations. We have PCI, we've got the trust services criteria for AICPA. We've done all of that to make the framework as flexible to any industry or any organization and any industry, because ultimately what it boils down to, for the most part, malicious actors don't necessarily care what industry you work in. They're going to attack you if they find the opportunity to attack you. So we've built our controls to be relevant to all industries.
Makes sense. Jumping forward a little bit and kind of, diving a little bit into Artemis specifically, Kathleen, one, if you could just give a little bit of intro of, what Artemis is, obviously your role there, and then, why you guys decided to go along the HITRUST journey.
So Artemis is a health benefits analytical tool that benefit professionals can use to make better decisions around their health data specifically. So they can drill down to if their specific population has, for example, a high diabetes diagnosis, then from there they can either provide additional tools and education around diabetes, or if that specific organization provides a cafeteria, they can provide more diabetic friendly type lunch meals. And the ultimate goal that we're after is to reduce healthcare cost overall. And so really because we are interacting with health data, that's really where we want our customers to know that we're doing everything we can to protect their data. And, it makes it easier also when you're talking about working with customers and my favorite security questionnaires that I get to answer, that again, like everybody has their own focus, and that when you say you're HITRUST, then it becomes much easier. They're like, okay, then like you cover everything, we're good, thank you very much. Where if you're not, they're more they want to investigate more and ask more questions. So that's really why we went into the HITRUST journey, is to show our customers that we're serious and we're going to do whatever it takes.
And diving in a little bit deeper, I know you guys decided to make a choice of kind of going after E1 first. And Ryan, you touched on a little bit of kind of the levels that exist within HITRUST. I guess, Ryan, if you could just talk to the couple levels, and then, if you could piggyback Kathleen and just explain kind of why you guys started where you are and where you're actually going, because your journey's kind of evolved since then.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have 3 assessment types with an interesting naming convention for each one. So the lowest, it was really originally built to address low, medium, and risk organizations. So the risk that you present not only to yourself, but to your business partners and or customers. So our E1, which stands for Essentials 1 year, is your absolute floor from a cybersecurity perspective. There's 44 controls in the E1. And what I like to tell people is, if you're not doing these 44 things, you need to rethink your life, because you're about to invite headache and or heartache into it, because these are the things that are being attacked or exploited the most. So E1 is absolute essentials. The I1, or implemented 1 year, is leading security practices. There's 182 controls in that assessment, and it's really designed for organizations who probably are meeting the essentials, but want to demonstrate that they are kind of leading the pack, if you will, from a cybersecurity perspective. The R2, which stands for risk-based 2 year, so it's a 2-year certification, is the most rigorous, it's the most comprehensive, and it's the most tailorable assessment that we have. So the R2 right now is the only assessment where you can pull in other, like I said earlier, authoritative sources, whether that be CCPA or GDPR or what have you. You can pull those into your assessment and then report out against those based on your maturity, if you have, you know, a regulator or a business partner that cares about that specific authoritative source. So the R2, I call it a significant emotional event. It is not for the faint of heart. It takes time. I can tell you, as someone who helped organizations get HITRUST certified for the better part of 10 years, it will take some time. It will take some resources. And I'm not saying you have to buy a lot of technology, but as Kathleen can probably attest, she's doing her homework on it now. There's very specific policies and procedures you have to write for every single control implementation. You have to demonstrate that the controls are actually implemented and functioning appropriately. So that takes time. And what I've seen organizations, typically it's about 12 to 18 months to get through that process. But I can tell you that you, in my experience, you are better off on the back end than you were when you first started on that journey. And I've had customers literally throw parties when they received their R2 certification. So think about, you know, what risk you present to the world, if you will, and then that becomes a part of the decision cycle of which assessment is most appropriate for you. And the one last thing that I'll add, and I think Kathleen will touch on this a little bit, is it's not a moving target. It's not, the goalposts aren't moving with each one of these. So let's say you went from the E1 to the R2 or the E1 to the I1, you're not completely starting over. Because the E1 is the absolute essentials based on threat intelligence, we put those 44 controls at the core of the 182. And then the 182 of the I1 are at the core of the R2. So you can actually use the work that you've already done to continue to progress and mature against that higher level of assessment and assurance.
So kind of our journey is we actually did start on the R2. And as we were starting that journey, the E1 came out. And so we had decided for us, it would be beneficial for us to go ahead and kind of switch to do the E1 to show the dedication that we had to our customers, to say, hey, we're going to, you know, meet the E1 and then we'll move on to the R2. And like Ryan said, is that you're just building upon the framework you already have. And to throw in that the E1, again, does have very similar controls to other frameworks. So for example, if you are SOC 2 Type 2, it's easy to transition between the two and start your, I'm going to say kickstart your E1 journey. So that's where we were like, yep, let's pivot. You know, we can get the E1 a little bit quicker since it's 44 controls, and we'll build upon that. And that's where we're headed. And I can't stress enough, like Ryan said, time. I have seen several orgs say like, hey, we want R2 and we're going to get it done in 9 months. No, unless you are very buttoned up and have a great, I don't even know how to say it, like you would have to be an incredible team to say, yep, we're going to do it in 9 months. So give yourself time and ensure leadership and everybody involved knows that it's a lot of time, a lot of resources. The journey is well worth it, but that goal date needs to be flexible so that, because you still have to, you know, do business also and innovate new projects and all of that stuff. So time is a big part of the journey, and ensure you have the time, resources, and flexibility.
Jumping forward, I mean, I think all of those things are absolutely critical. Going through your journey as well, Kathleen, anything else that you think is, you know, critical to have in place beyond buy-in and understanding from the leadership team to be successful in going through this HITRUST journey?
I think an open mind. Again, like I said, the overall understanding that this is a journey, not an end goal, that it will continue to evolve, that, you know, everybody understands that you have to be flexible with it. And interpretation, again, is a big part of HITRUST. So be flexible and open-minded to different ways to meet the controls, because sometimes what you may read the control and see the control, somebody else reads different. So be open-minded about it, because there is more than one way to do things, and do it the right way.
I know from a, you know, team structure and kind of tools perspective, you guys made some decisions that you really kind of needed some critical infrastructure to be able to be successful. Can you walk through kind of the considerations that you had for that as well?
So a big part of the journey is being able to assign ownership and to different teams and people to then, I'm going to say, shift the core responsibility of compliance from your compliance team to the org. If you try to silo that, it becomes almost impossible. So that was one of the reasons we decided that we needed a platform, and we decided on Hyperproof, is that you are able to assign that ownership. They can see the specific controls they're trying to meet and know that they're responsible for it. And then as your platform or your business evolves, they can continue to know at the core, in a specific procedure, what controls you're trying to meet within that procedure. So then be able to grow those procedures and processes around the control. Because so many times people may not understand that you're doing a specific procedure to meet a control. And so then they will be like, oh, well, you know, that can be kind of cumbersome, so we're just going to change it up and do this instead. And then you come down to audit time and you're like, you did what? Like, so let's back up, because, you know, we had this specific step in there for a reason. So it really does give the ability to give ownership to everybody in the org and keep those controls at the core of all of your processes and procedures. And everybody knows they're there, not just compliance.
Just a comment from me to add on to what Kathleen's saying. You know, there's a lot, because of all the work necessary across all the frameworks that folks have to show compliance with. You know, there's been a lot of discussion around, well, let's automate and automate as much as possible. And it's a great thought. And when we started and founded Hyperproof, we definitely said, hey, let's go down that road. And we've added, you know, almost 100 different systems that we can sync with and pull evidence from and run tests on, and it's a great approach. But I think Kathleen is hitting on a very important point, which is that it's not a one-person job, especially as the number of frameworks grows and grows, or you go up to a higher framework of HITRUST, where there's more work to do. And I think Kathleen really, really hit it on the head. You want to make sure the organization is supporting you, and you can put the work where it most naturally belongs. At Hyperproof, we believe that's not just with the right people who have the right responsibility, but it's also in the right tool. And so when you're looking at Hyperproof, you may find that a certain task should be completed in Hyperproof, or sometimes it may be something that gets completed in Jira or ServiceNow or one of the other tools. So I think that's definitely kind of a founding principle for Hyperproof, is it's that compliance is a team sport, and it's a mixture of automations and what the team can do in terms of oversight, getting ahead of these issues, and minimally just making sure through dashboarding that things are healthy and going well. And so, you know, it's a great, you know, thing to apply when you're when you're doing a wide set of controls, a combination of automation, and then having a very efficient collaboration platform, which we like to think we built into Hyperproof.
So skipping forward a little bit, I mean, I think, we talked about the efficiency side, and Kathleen talked a little bit about, hey, 9 months even then for R2 is quick, or would be hard to do. I'm curious, Ryan, a little bit from your side first, of when you see companies going through the HITRUST journey, how does that align to what you've seen kind of across the board? And, from an efficiency standpoint, that was obviously part of the ethos of how you guys created HITRUST was, don't waste time, don't do duplicative work. But, what role do you see software and also processes play in that? And then obviously, Kathleen, what benefits from an evidence perspective have you seen with Hyperproof, particularly around the efficiency part when it comes to HITRUST preparation?
Yeah, so I think HITRUST has recently turned a corner, to say it one way. HITRUST has been historically a pretty manual effort, right? So that R2, which is our historical assessment, that's the one that's been around for 17 years. As I mentioned, significant emotional event, takes a lot of time, takes a lot of effort. And that the reason is it's not a yes/no assessment. It's a trust but verify assessment. So you have to provide evidence for at least 3 levels of maturity for every single control. You have to show that there's a policy, you have to show that there's a process, and you have to demonstrate that the control is implemented functioning. When I used to do HITRUST assessments, the average R2 was about 375 requirements, aka controls, times 3 levels of maturity. That's a whole lot of evidence to collect and generate and kind of wrangle, right? And we've been told by the market, regardless of industry, our external assessor firms, our customers have been telling us for years, there's got to be a better way. And boom, tools like Hyperproof have come out, and we are now starting to engage in figure out how to work to improve the efficiency of HITRUST assessments. Craig just mentioned that they've built capabilities to integrate with hundreds of tools in order to automatically pull evidence out of those tools as it relates to the control specifications. Well, we at HITRUST want to get in on that game, right? So we're not going to build a tool like Hyperproof, but we want to figure out how do we work with a Hyperproof in order to make the assessments that much more efficient. Because I will tell you, when I say that the R2 takes 12 to 18 months to get through, a lot of that is because of remediation. People are just not mature enough for it. But there's definitely time that it takes to just generate and collect and score the evidence. So that's where HITRUST is going. We did have a question in the chat come up around, is Hyperproof going to be updated to include the E1 and the I1? The answer is yes, in the future. I can't tell you an exact timeline. We at HITRUST are building the plumbing to do something to that effect, but I don't have a release date or anything to share with anybody. What I can tell you that if you're a current HITRUST customer, you can actually take your assessments, which is what Kathleen has done, and you can import it into Hyperproof and then leverage the features, functions, and capabilities of Hyperproof to make that work that much more efficient. So there's a today and then there's a future, and we're working towards the future and making it easier for everybody. More efficient, I shouldn't say easier.
Yeah, to kind of build off of that, you can still stay on this slide, is that that is another one of the reasons we did go with Hyperproof, is that we were able to import HITRUST, knowing that HITRUST, because of the way your controls, I'm going to say, are assigned, is through that assessment, and then being able to add any additional frameworks that you want like PCI or CCPA or GDPR, is that it's not the R2 isn't a set number of controls, so it would be very difficult to say, okay, Hyperproof, we want you to be able to have the assessment ready to go like I'm going to say a SOC 2. So that was one of the reasons we did go with Hyperproof, is because we could upload the requirements and controls and go ahead and I'm going to say manually. I use that carefully because you can do an upload, and that's what I did. Is within that upload, is I, for the most part, had it all built out quick and easy, and then uploaded the whole program that also then tied to my SOC 2 controls and my labels and evidence and several other different parts of Hyperproof that makes it easy to know, okay, this control also relates to these SOC controls. So this is kind of I only have to look at one spot, and like these all meet the same thing for SOC 2 and HITRUST. And HITRUST does have the mappings for you in different ways. So I know they have an Excel document. So if I wanted to get extremely ambitious, I could go and create those mappings myself. Haven't had the time yet, but it is on my to-do list. So that's really one of the biggest reasons that we did choose Hyperproof, is because they are flexible, and you can really make it the way you want it. And I looked at other platforms, and especially the ones that have been around a lot longer tend to be a little bit more cookie cutter, that make it a little bit more difficult. So that's why we really liked Hyperproof, and it worked with everything we needed it to. And the automation.
Yeah, if I could just do a callback to an earlier comment you made, Kathleen, around, I mean, you're basically saying trying to build a culture of compliance, so it's not purely on the shoulders of the compliance team to do this work. One of the things that, in my experience, I've seen organizations fall down on is, okay, you've gone through the audit. It was a sprint, and if it was the R2, it was a marathon, and you got through it. You got that certificate, you hang it on your website, you hang it on the wall, you throw your party, and then, day 3 after certification, everybody kind of goes back to their day job and forgets to pay attention to the controls and making sure that they're still functioning properly. And one of the cool things, you can see it right here on the slide, that Hyperproof does is, because it's integrating in real time with a lot of these other tools, it can actually give you the health of the control as it relates to your HITRUST certification, or as it relates to the other frameworks and regulations that you need to demonstrate compliance to. And that really takes all security and all compliance to the next level. It's this whole idea of continuous assessments and continuous assurance. It's already built into the Hyperproof tool to give you that visibility. So Kathleen can go into the dashboard and see, I don't know, this control in AWS is not functioning properly because there was a configuration change, so on and so forth. She can immediately, instead of waiting for the audit to come back around in 12 months, she can immediately go out to the people responsible for maintaining and administering that control and ask them to improve it, because a lot of these breaches and these disclosures that we see, it's not that the organization was completely terrible at all times. They just had a bad day in some cases, and it got exploited on that bad day. So having that visibility within Hyperproof, I think, is really, really valuable to organizations as they continuously think about assurance and compliance.
Moving forward a little bit, from Kathleen, from your perspective, when you're when I know you're not completely done, obviously, and as you've mentioned over and over, HITRUST is a journey with it. But as you've gone through it with you and your team, what are some of the key learnings that have jumped out to you and your team that you think it's important for others to know outside of the buy-in part that you've obviously already covered to begin with?
I think that in the end, it's worth it. I think I am not going to quote a HITRUST statistic, but I did see something come through in the last few weeks about HITRUST and breaches. So anybody that has met HITRUST R2 versus like how many of those have been breached like that. I don't know the exact statistics. So Ryan, if you have it, great, share it, please. But that it is worth it. And it is a learning opportunity for the entire org. And it really shifts your security and compliance altogether from a security and compliance silo to a security and compliance culture org-wide. And people start asking questions on many different levels as you start working on it. They'll see a control of some sort, or they're working on it, and then they say, oh, wait, maybe we need to look at this other process or procedure. And is that where we need it to be, even if it's not in scope? And so it makes you a security focused organization, which is so important. As I will tell my coworkers that I need to make you my best friend, but you're also my worst enemy. That's exactly what it is that it's putting security in their hands also, so they know what they need to be doing on a daily basis. And they can be not only my coworker and do their job, but they can also be my best friend and let us know what's going on and what needs to be looked at and improved, and ensure that we have security around everything that we do.
And moving forward a little bit to make sure that we've got some time for Q&A. I think combining a couple questions. Ryan, you touched on this a little bit of kind of where HITRUST is today and where you guys are going. I know there was obviously the launch of the directory that we're a part of, but I guess what is HITRUST's vision for how they see this continued evolution, and then for that directory, how are you hoping that customers or whoever uses it to get value today?
So calling upon my experience as an auditor, external assessor, someone who helped organizations get HITRUST certified, one of the most common questions was, okay, I have this gap in my control environment based on what HITRUST wants. Well, what tools, products, services are there that can satisfy this gap? Well, HITRUST has built this directory, aptly named the Products and Services Directory, to solve that specific problem. So you can actually go in and look at a specific control within the HITRUST framework and see all of the products and services that actually satisfy or can fill that gap for that specific control. And it's pretty nifty because you can do a lot of different homework in the directory itself. I've seen some organizations use it right up front to do some benchmarking or a gap assessments and say, okay, well, I know I have this tool, I know I have this tool, I know I have this tool, but I don't have these. What can solve those problems? And they already kind of have an idea of where they want to get started from a remediation perspective. I've seen others use it during the actual remediation phase. And then there's a third group who are doing it post-mortem. Oh, I have these corrective action plans, or I have these gaps in my assessments. Who can I reach out to? What products or services are there that I can utilize in order to fill that moving forward? Again, thinking about that culture of security and compliance. And the nifty thing about where it's going more generally is right now, you can look at the HITRUST CSF, the framework, and all the controls, but as you can see on the screenshot there, we're also building it so you can look at other standards, regulations, or frameworks to understand, oh, here's Hyperproof. Hyperproof can help me with not only HITRUST, it can help me with GDPR, it can help me with HIPAA, it can help me with X, Y, and Z. So in that multi-regulatory environment, it's a way of kind of centering the chaos, if you will, and not getting into analysis paralysis on, what should I do? What's relevant to me? How do I fill these gaps? So it's proving to be a pretty nifty tool.
And
or go for it, Kathleen.
I was just going to say real quick around that about the different frameworks. That is one thing that Hyperproof does have. Is I know leadership likes to ask, well, how are we on this? If we wanted to do GDPR or some other form of regulatory requirements, how far off are we? And it does have a jumpstart feature that you can go in and say, okay, from this framework, how close would I be to be meeting that different framework? So I'll use the SOC 2 and NIST, for example, is, okay, we're SOC 2 type 2. I want to do the NIST CSF. How close am I to meeting that? And it'll say, hey, from these controls, you're 50% there. You can say then to leadership, like, yep, we're about 50% there. It would take about this much to complete it, which is very, very helpful for those quick answers. Otherwise, you have to do a lot of research.
And Craig, from your perspective, obviously we are very active and involved with HITRUST, but where do you see our journey with HITRUST today, and where do you want to see it go in the future?
Yeah, it's a great question. As we were talking about it previously in this discussion, we're talking about how HITRUST was really architected towards being able to solve multiple frameworks at once. And that's a place where we have a real meeting of the minds. Hyperproof, we were about a 6-year-old company, and part of the founding vision was to ensure that you can make sure that any of the work we put in towards one framework, just as Kathleen was just talking about right here, can be used on others. And so the approach that we've taken to that historically is we've been embracing different frameworks that are in the Hyperproof product. And just as Kathleen described, you connect the work from one to the other. But when you look at something like HITRUST, which has such a broad reach in terms of the controls and the different scenarios that it's trying to kind of help, assure compliance with and secure, et cetera, that's super helpful for Hyperproof, because then you effectively get almost multiple frameworks in one. And so it really, really, follows the ethos of where we're going. And so I think, kind of continuing to work together with HITRUST, where HITRUST has a very opinionated, in a good way, view of the content and what needs to happen. And Hyperproof has a very opinionated, hopefully in a good way, view of the workflow that needs to happen in order to really make it easy to do things that are increasingly complex. Like when we talk about, maybe we're talking about the R2 or something like that, we're saying, hey, it's a cathartic experience. Well, I think everybody on the call wants to make it something that could be done a little bit more simply in a little less time. And so I think that's a place where together HITRUST and Hyperproof will kind of continue to go. In addition, certainly on the products and, on the directory and the services directory, there are additional modules, additional capabilities in Hyperproof that we'll want to call out. And very importantly, HITRUST has a wonderful ecosystem of partners that are assessors, right? And Hyperproof, through its technology, also has a very interesting network of assessors, including some very, very large ones. And I think to the degree we can start to kind of mesh the assessment pool a little bit and say, hey, folks who are been doing work in Hyperproof can now easily do what they've wanted to do for years, which is get more involved in HITRUST. Or the opposite, folks who have been doing HITRUST can say, well, wait a minute, I know there's a demand for a couple other frameworks here, maybe it's a NIST, as Ryan was talking about, or what have you. Hey, I can actually kind of use Hyperproof for that and get a very authoritative view on that particular framework. I think that kind of mixing and meshing back and forth is going to be really, really powerful. But the key behind it all is the content that HITRUST has to offer in terms of really keeping it up to date, keeping it, at the industry cutting edge, and working it across as many other frameworks as possible to be inclusive, and the software that Hyperproof provides. the two of them together are a pretty great pair. And even though we're deepening the relationship and we will eventually get to the content first party and Hyperproof, we've been working together for at least 2.5 years already behind the scenes on this type of relationship. So I'm incredibly excited to deepen it here today and continue taking it forward.
Awesome. Jump into some Q&A, and if anyone has any questions, please put them in the Q&A box. But one that came up is, how did things like the Change Healthcare breach impact the relevance of frameworks like HITRUST?
Oh, I think a lot is to be figured out, to be candid and transparent. We're still learning every single day, and HITRUST is watching every single day about the elements of the incidents that breach the pain of the Change Healthcare event. I can tell you that we are looking at, once we get more information from Change and from whomever else on the actual elements of it, we're going to take a hard look at our controls. Where do we need to add more emphasis, right? Because for me, the biggest lesson learned from Change was less about confidentiality of data, but the availability of data, right? And in my own opinion, I don't think we as security professionals have done a really good job for decades around paying attention to things like disaster recovery and business continuity plans, not only for ourselves, but more importantly for our interconnected partners and our vendors. If the data may not have been disclosed, but if it's not available, that is just as impactful. And I think that's a hard lesson learned from the Change incident. But we're looking at other ways to prioritize critical controls, whether it be during our quality assurance process or the way that we build our assessments. We may see some changes in future versions of the HITRUST CSF, which you could probably directly correlate to the things that we learned from Change once we get more information. As some people may not realize, we're not on the sent-to line for all things Change, but it's definitely something we're watching pretty closely.
And another follow-up question, if you're trying to make, the argument to leadership of why doing something like HITRUST is useful for the business, obviously there's so many frameworks to go after. The commonalities is one point, but when you're trying to make that conversation and make them understand the strategic impact of doing something like this, what are some of the key points that you would highlight or focus on?
I would
focus on the statistic that he has in chat.
Yeah, for those who didn't see it in the chat, Kathleen was referencing a statistic that we recently published in our first ever trust report that basically states in the last 2 years, only 0.64%, so less than 1% of HITRUST certified organizations suffered a breach. That is pretty telling. I would love to be able to show you a statistic for something, because we mentioned NIST and SOC 2 and others. There's no centralized way for that information to be correlated, but I can tell you that at least in healthcare, I think it's 78% of organizations have suffered a breach in the last year or something crazy like that. So, it's not a direct correlation, but I think the numbers, can be compared at least to a certain degree. Like I said, I've seen this make organizations better. And as long as you have the resources in order to pursue HITRUST, it has become somewhat of the bar, especially in healthcare and other industries, it's growing, to ensure that you are doing the right things from a security and privacy and risk management perspective.
And I don't work for HITRUST, but from my perspective, there's a lot of resources on the HITRUST website that they're actual PowerPoints and PDFs that you can download to provide to leadership that say exactly why HITRUST, that makes it a much easier sell, and you don't have to necessarily create it yourself.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. We're a little bit over time. I guess, Craig, Kathleen, Ryan, any final closing comments or just, final things to say as we close out the session?
I mean, from me, all I would say is, feel free to get in touch and hear more about how we're working together. And we're happy to take you through kind of a step-by-step of how both Hyperproof and HITRUST can make your work, easier no matter what industry you're in. So that would just be kind of my call to action.
I want to thank Hyperproof and HITRUST for starting that journey of working together, because I have worked with HITRUST before. They were, I'm going to say, more siloed. And so to know that they're starting to work with some of these platforms to make it easier for the businesses is wonderful.
I'm good. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.